Good morning everybody and welcome to another APSAD Insights seminar. Welcome to everyone on webinar land. First of all, I would like to kick off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and elders past, present and emerging, and pass that welcome on to also to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders that might be joining us today. And it gives me great pleasure today to introduce a speaker who is going to talk on a topic which is quite significant to Australia with what's happened recently this week, with it being announced that alcohol is the alcohol products are going to be carrying new warning labels regarding drinking during pregnancy for the ladies that are pregnant, and consuming alcohol whilst pregnant seems to be an issue in Australia, with nearly 50% of Australian women having admitted that they had consumed alcohol during the pregnancy. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Janet Hammill, who's going to be talking on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and she's from the University of Queensland, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome her to the stage now. So thank you.
So I don't need a...
No, you should be right with that one.
Good morning, everybody. This is Jan Hammill. I'm a descendant of the Gomeroi people of the Pilliga Scrub of New South Wales. And I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners, the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and also to the present Brisbane Council of Elders who continue to observe and guide their culture within the city of Brisbane. Thank you very much to Insight for inviting me today. And I'd like to talk about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders as constituting biological genocide. And so don't take any notes, because Jim's going to send you around the PowerPoint and you'll be able to access my notes below each page. And some pages I'll flip through pretty quickly, because you'll be able to read it yourself later. So you can't sort of say biological genocide without backing it up. And is that coming up?
Yep.
No. There it is. Now, Raphael Lemkin actually coined the phrase in 1944, genocide, and it's from the Greek genos, or equaling race, and then side equaling killing. And Lemkin defined genocide as physical, biological and cultural. And the physical, the massacre and mutilation, deprivation of livelihood, starvation, exposure, often by deportation, slavery, and biological separation of families, sterilisation, destruction of the fetus, and perturbations of the reproductive system. Cultural, desecration and destruction of cultural symbols, etc., and the cultural leadership. We won't go into any more of that, because there's the reference there, and you can follow that up by yourself. We'll go now on to the developmental origins of health and disease. And we know that for a long time we knew that 1988 it was David Barker who first drew attention to the fact that there may be things going on, and it was called fetal origins of adult disease. Then it later became developmental when they realised that it was transgenerational. And we know that the consequences of an unfavourable environment in the womb may be even passed across many generations. And the concept of programming of lifelong health and disease by prenatal life has important health implications for future generations of our children and the society in which they live. And we learnt a lot of this from the Dutch Hunger Winter Study 1944, about September, to the liberation of Europe, May 1945. There was a failed attempt by the Allies to land paratroopers into West Holland, and it failed. As I say, it was a failed attempt, and in retaliation, the Germans starved the people of West Holland. And they were eating their tulip bulbs and living very, very with a low intake of calories. And then about 1947, some researchers decided to go in and look at the births of the women, of the babies who were born, who were conceived. I think they had four categories, and they found that the starvation actually affected the fetus depending on what was developing at that time. They went on to follow those babies, and they could actually predict what chronic diseases they were going to develop, what they were going to die of, etc. So that started that look at genetics and later epigenetics, and your grandmother's not looking over your shoulder, she's actually in it. And so how did that affect Aboriginal people? Well, if we look, there we are, at life as it was, Dr. Ros Kidd wrote a history for the Princess Alexandra Hospital, and she quoted Archibald Meston, who wrote in 1870 that the South Brisbane area was clothed in dense bush. Men crossed the river, fishing from bark canoes made from broad sheets of stringy bark, or casting their heart-shaped tow-row nets to encircle shoals of mullet. And others climbed vines to get possums and koalas, and the women and the children dived in amongst the water to get lily roots, etc. And this is how they had done it for 50, 60,000 years. And then there was a violent change came about with the arrival of strangers in 1788, and strangers still was their culture and the biological effects it inflicted. And this was exactly 50 years after the boats landed in Sydney Cove. And so I should have put there the first evidence of reprogramming in the womb began a mere 50 years after. This is an etching from the Mitchell Library in Sydney, and it shows a man looking angry with his partner, and he's got a bottle of alcohol. She's drinking from a bottle. She has a baby at her breast. There's two skinny dogs, and there's a little child there with a pot belly. Now that tells us, that the child could be suffering from marasmus or kwashiorkor or marasmic kwashiorkor, with deprivation of vitamins and proteins, etc. And this was the beginning, actually, of something really bad. I might have these in the wrong section, but anyway. We'll go now on to what is a teratogen. And it's an agent that causes birth disabilities or disruption to the normal fetal development. And included amongst that, there are numerous medications and Agent Orange, cannabis, tobacco, thalidomide. And we know that teratogens cross the placenta of the fetus. Even environmental fog crosses the placenta. But thalidomide was a notorious teratogen. Even one tablet caused problems, and these were the problems: 21 to 22 days after conception, baby with no ears, etc. But after 34 days, there was no effect. And now thalidomide's come into its own again for treating leprosy in third world countries. We're just most concerned that they're not giving it to pregnant women or women who may become pregnant. And so there is actually no safe limit of alcohol during pregnancy. My colleague Lorraine Hayes, an Aboriginal woman, bachelor woman who has a master's degree, she's just doing the finer points of her PhD now, but since 1997 she's been trying to raise awareness of fetal alcohol, and she thinks that, you know, there's well over 100 of her own people, family, that have the problem. She was to do her master's, she went into a community and she looked at 5 years of birth data from 1995 to 2000, and there was an average of 52 births per annum. And in one particular year, 92% of the mums said they'd used alcohol or were using alcohol during the pregnancy. 100% used cannabis, and 17% used inhalants. And so of the 640 children that were born that year, 540 were born to mothers who drank. And so what we're seeing now in communities is second and third generation fetal alcohol, because girls with fetal alcohol cannot manage their fertility, and they're having more babies than women who can. And so this is what's happened then. People were drinking and hanging around towns, and they became offensive to the white eyes. So they were moved to into missions and reserves, you know, to soothe the dying pillow or to assimilate. And so I constructed this years ago from a population tree. That's the white section, the population tree. And in that time, 15 years and below, there were 42.2% of the population. I believe it's something like 50% now that are below 16 years. So here you look and you can see the things that contribute to that dysfunction in that community. And first of all, I was just looking at prenatal and preconceptional history. So we know now that dad's use of cannabis, or yandi as we call it, is most detrimental to the fetus and to the children. And that has never been acknowledged before, and it's a very big area, dad's use of that. And we know that with the birth, the history, so the history becomes part of that fetal programming that we, as I've just gone through there, the dispossession, the oppression, the intergenerational trauma, and the ongoing poverty contributes to this picture here. And so there are more fathers, more males born than females, but the men die off more quickly. And so you've got the environments of both parents. You've got epigenetics and substance use, as Lorraine Hayes' data points out. So if you're looking at the left-hand side, you'll see the males are less visible in community functioning because they're in detention, in prisons. There's racial profiling that affects their lifestyle. And they succumb early to chronic diseases and they die early. On the maternal side, you've got this high visibility of the women, especially the grannies. The granny burnout is significant. And it begins before birth. There's the maternal stress, the parenting style, and from victims to perpetrators, and the education system that doesn't cater appropriately. So you've got a high female visibility and on the maternal economy, because the men only get paid once a fortnight. The women get some income weekly, whether it's the mother's benefit one week or the dad's the next week. Or the children's the next week. And what happens if dad's got some substance use disorder, then on the off week, he has to stand over a woman to get money. But there's quite a bit I've written there on the notes about that. So when we'll go back to the fetal alcohol, and Professor Sterling Claren, he said in Toledo a few years ago, in 2014, that fetal alcohol is a huge epidemic and it should be way ahead of heart disease and cancer. He said, this is a big deal. And the disorder is mostly invisible because people with this kind of brain damage can look perfectly normal. And it manifests primarily as behaviour problems, and children misdiagnosed with attention deficit disorder or some other problem, or autism or something, when in actual fact, no, the doctors are reluctant to ask if mums used alcohol. So what is the likely prevalence of FASD in Australia? We don't know, but we do know that Philip May and his team looked at mid-socioeconomic group in Midwestern US, and they were mostly Caucasian children, and they came up with, they used 1.1 and 5% as conservative estimates, and 3.1 to 9.8 they thought were more logical. But since then, Philip May, I've been in touch, and he said, in actual fact, if we had finer diagnostic tools at the time, we would have said 10%. So when I put this up, I worked that out with Philip May's data. And if we apply it there to the total births of Australia, at 1.1, we've got 3,422. Through to 9.8%, it means 30,488 babies per annum being born with fetal alcohol. And there's no political will to do anything about it. That is the great tragedy. And so it goes through there, the total children, which would mean we've got nearly 500,000 and over 2 million from the total population of Australia. But that's all there, and the references, etc. So which means that, in actual fact, if we look at 5%, we're saying, okay, the 2016 statistics, 311,104 babies born, which would be 42 babies per day with fetal alcohol. And in that year, it would have been 15,555. And there was a study done in the Fitzroy Valley of about 10 years ago of children who lived in communities up the valley, and 21% were found to have FASD. So what does it look like when you start looking at the researchers? So the only ones, of course, have to be animal studies. And these are 3 models of, my colleagues did this, of 3 mice. And mouse A, as you can see, has a normal skull. Mouse B has got an askewed one. And the mouse C has even got a piece of the skull missing. And it's a very small skull, so I want you to take that on board, that tiny head. And we're seeing that with really extreme cases of fetal alcohol. And likewise, if we look at, this is 1994, and so we're looking at the first one. It's the normal Corpus Callosum, as you can see up there at the top with the little black arrows. And then in D and F, the black arrows indicate fetal alcohol syndrome. So it means the baby was actually exposed during the first trimester of pregnancy. And that also you're able to access, and just look at the Corpus Callosum and of number F. It's just, you can't define it there. And the same with D. And what's more, you look at the outline, the profile of the face, the normal profile of B, then it gets a bit stranger with D, and likewise with F. So we've got new diagnostic tools in Australia which are about to change yet again. In the last couple of weeks we've been told about another method. So the diagnostic criteria, it actually takes about 18 hours or 2 days to diagnose a child with fetal alcohol using this method. So that's why these children don't show up in longitudinal studies and things like that, because, well, the longitudinal studies, they just don't have that sort of time to devote to a child. But these are the official Australian guidelines, and there's the reference there too. And then a Russian researcher who migrated to the US found that she went through did a systematic review and meta-analysis of all the publications to look at the comorbidities, and she found 428 medical conditions linked to alcohol exposure before birth. There were the congenital malformations, deformities, chromosomal abnormalities, mental and behavioural disorders. We're finding the cognitive disorders are massive, and I'll go into that more later. So what are you looking at? So these are the things you're looking at, the physical and the cognitive. I'm not going to go into this a lot either, because you've got it all, we've got it all here, but things that I have to point out to you. We know that with the eye problems, there's distortion of the retinal pathways. We know the hearing problems. You know, the ENT specialists say it's hearing loss. It's not loss. I've got a slide in a minute to show you that. It's the children never had the hearing, and it's related to other things. The hand and feet abnormalities, we ignore the teeth, and we know these little ones. The dentists will say they're eating too many sugary drinks, etc., etc. It's not they're born with the dental problems, the skeletal malformations, and the heart murmurs and the defects are totally overlooked by the cardiologists and the cardiac surgeons. Really, they should be, wanting to know why there are these congenital abnormalities. Instead, they just fix the problems. With the kidneys, we know that there are often the kidneys are small. They're what's the word for it? They're a U-shaped kidney. Parts of the kidneys are missing, and so that person, as they get older, develop renal disease very severely, and liver hernias. And the genitalia malformations are very prevalent. And of course, the cognitive features there are what gets them suspended from school and expelled and all those sorts of things, and placed into out-of-home care, etc. So back in the 70s, Professor Herman Losa, he had a clinic at the Munster Children's Clinic and this was in the 1970s. He got the children referred to him had already been diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome, so they had facial features. What we used to know here in Australia as funny-looking kids. So the funny-looking kids were referred to him, and these were the things he found. And in the 1970s, he also wrote papers on the cardiac abnormalities, but cardiologists have ignored it. No one's taken it up. and microcephalic, and of course that's what I'm saying, the small head. So we won't dwell on that, but we'll go on to Lena Longley's hearing things. Now, she presented this at a conference in 2006, and they have chronic ear infections, conductive hearing loss, and FASD. And so it's actually the auditory processing that is the problem here. The child's brain is not processing what is being said. So you have to repeat instructions 3 or 4 times. The more you repeat it, they may only pick up one word in every sentence. So you confine your instructions down to one sentence, and you repeat that. And this is why it seems the Noel Pearson intervention on the Cape with the reading is working so well, because it's almost a rote system, and the children are being given time. And I've heard some special educators from the US and the UK saying it's a no-brainer, that this is the way that you have to teach kids. So we'll flip on from there. I hope I'm not going too fast, but as I say, my notes are pretty. So we'll just do this one. I'm being very bold here about this, about my kids. The littlest bloke, he was older than the one on the right, and he's now 31, and he's very much a close friend of mine. He's a wonderful young man, and he was doing really poorly. And then when he was 18, look at the little skinny legs. Health failed to pick him up, and then so did the education system. I mean, when you've got someone failure to thrive like that, and he's a teenager there, I might add, he's 14 or 15 there, and it's pretty obvious there are things wrong with him, and yet he was demonised, and he's had an awful life. But when he was 18, he took up with this young girl, and her parents moved down to Tassie. He's gone with them, and they're doing beautifully. And because there's 3 meals a day on the table and a whole lot of other things, he's done a TAFE course. He now can work in the shearing sheds, and he's loving life. And he still can't read and write, but he's doing well. So this is his face. One day I went around to his mum's place with a bootload of things people had given me, and she was there, an end-stage emphysema, vacuuming the floor with a long cord of oxygen. And she took this photo off the television and said, "I want you to have it." And I said, no. And she insisted, so I said, "I'll take a copy of it and I'll bring it back to you." Well, when I took the copy, look at the little face. I mean, here is the 4-digit diagnostic code, and you see the Afro-American child and the Caucasian American child, and if you look at the very top is the worst case scenarios, and that's what he is. He has a smooth philtrum, a thin vermilion, epicanthal folds, and the flattened mid-face of a child with FAS, and he was missed. He was missed, but not only was he missed, I haven't done this before, but I've failed to raise awareness in 16 years for the way he was demonised in the community. And of course the principal of the school, Chris Sara at Cherbourg, gave kids school stationery and dictated these letters for the kids to write about my young fellow. And you hear of bullying by other kids. This is bullying by the principal of the school. It's pretty ghastly, and now Sara is Director General of DAPSIT. And, you know, I've never done this out in the open before, but I think it's time, because at the time I went to the Commissioner for Children and Young People. I mean, at the time I was there working in the community. I was really well connected with the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth. And I went to all the people that I thought would speak up for this young man. And they didn't. Everybody. And then this past week, I've had somebody else in very high position, well, the highest position, and he said, well, sorry, I've got a conflict of interest. And so, you know, it's adult politics overruling the rights of the child, and it's pretty dreadful. And when I showed this to some of the women I was working with, one grandmother said to me, that's my granddaughter, she can't write like that. And she wouldn't have said chosen. And what happened was 6 boys had come up to me and said, when are we going down to Tickford? Because the Tickford team was in Cherbourg making billy carts with the kids. And so the team leader was there, and I said, well, okay, give me your names, you know. And we got them down to Melbourne for 10 days. And Ford and the ACTU and other groups sponsored us. And we went down, they had an amazing, it was about talking about getting real jobs, and there are people to support you. And when we got back, the whole lot of us were demonised. Sarah had put up this thing that nobody wanted to talk to us, that we were just such bad, you know, I was a bad person and so were the kids, because I took the bad kids to Melbourne. And this just went on. I think it's still going on. It's pretty awful. And especially when you think of the little one, the Northern Territory, who committed suicide at the beginning of this year because she didn't want to go back to school, because it was bullying from other children. So what do you do when it's bullying from adults? You know, it's pretty devastating. So this was, so where do these kids end up? They end up in the prisons because they can't read and write. Everybody's been onto them. This was one that, of the West Australia's only got one youth detention centre, and that's Banksia Hill. And they looked at the children there. They assessed the youth 10 to 17 years and 11 months. And now that brings me to a point now. My kids, I've got my kids. One I call my grandson. He first went to youth detention centre when he was 10 years of age. At the time, his brain, his cognitive action would have been about 3-4 years of age if he was lucky. And so then when he was 17, he went into the big house. By then, his brain would have been functioning at about maybe teenager, probably only 10 or 11 years of age, and he was put in the big house because Queensland was the only state that was jailing 17-year-olds in the prisons. So that's why this youth detention were up to 18 years of age, and there were 99 youths, and the findings were that 89% had at least one domain of severe neurodevelopmental impairment. And of those, 36 were diagnosed with FASD, a prevalence of 36%. But if they had used finer diagnostic tools, they would have got more. Now, Dr. Paul White, who's the Director of Disability Sector in Department of Communities, his staff, he and his staff have got this new cognitive measurement tool, and they can actually measure function. They did the GUDDY study, which means peace, come rest, come heal, looking at homeless people in Cairns, and they had 63, mostly Aboriginal men, I think, and they were on that revolving door in and out of jail. And they had very, very severe cognitive impairment. It would have been hard to say whether it was from their drinking lifestyle or whether it was from birth. But even so now, the synapse Professor Claire Townsend and Paul White and the other team are working with the Murray courts now, and they're going in to look at 80 women in the women's prison using the Guddy tool, as they're calling it. And so Diane Melbourne, I think so many of us have been to Oregon and done her training course. She's gave birth. She's a white middle-class lady, and she set up the Facets program in Oregon, and so many of us have been there to do her training. And she said, well, what are the ethical implications of failure to recognise FASD? And it's preventable is there's no maternal drinking, but we have to be so careful about labelling mums, because in actual fact women don't deliberately drink to harm their fetus. And we know also that if in a perfect world parents would plan for pregnancy, dad would stop drinking, because we know his drinking at conception too is detrimental, but we just don't know how so or how much. And so it's about being there to support, and it's brain-based. It can include physical though, and the IQ is not necessarily under 70, and some have higher, but what I'm noticing with second and third generation fetal alcohol is that the IQ is getting lower. Now, my young fellow whose face you saw, his IQ was 57. Education Queensland had nobody recognised his low IQ. They just went straight out and turned it on to him, you know. And alcohol versus thalidomide, we know that alcohol is detrimental across the entire pregnancy and probably before and afterwards with the breastfeeding. And of course, they do inappropriate sexual and illegal behaviour. And there's child-on-child violence. Like 1 week, I had a young fellow in court, he was 12, for he'd been sexually abused. And the next week, he was in court for sexually abusing a child. And the arson is big. Kids with fetal alcohol love fire, love burning down houses or whatever they can, shoplifting, and they vehicle misuse, and they've got 5-second brains. And you sort of say, stay there, and you know they're not going to be there in 5 minutes. That's expecting too much. And they're also very naive and gullible, and they don't learn from their mistakes because the frontal lobes are impacted. They can't. They don't have empathy and memory deficits, and the language is a big thing. Literacy and the early juvenile justice system, and of course the same with parenting. They don't know how to parent, and the courts have punitive responses. But I have to tell you, the Queensland courts are really open to change now. It's been pretty fantastic. And they can't keep parole orders. And the justice reinvestment, is it too little too late? Because these kids need a 24/7 brain, so an external brain for 20 every hour of the day. So how do you do that? And I wanted to tell you there about the parole orders. So many of my kids, the boys that I've been following for 23 years, they're due for parole, and the next thing they lose it. Someone says something, they slug them, and maybe it's a warder, and they slug him or they cheek them or something. Next thing they know, they've got more offences against them, and you know, some of them been there 3, 4, 5 years, just that were due for parole 3, 4, 5 years ago, and they can't because there's new charges being added, and my grandson is one of those kids. And so there are some principles here for managing FASD to accept the brain difference and apply the developmental age expectations and consider the uniqueness of the individual. Now, that's where I have this passionate stuff about it. What we've got to do with these kids, and not just the kids, I mean, it's adults and, as I say, grandparents. You know, two of my boys were grandparents at 29 and 31, were grandfathers at 29 and 31. And so what we've got to do, whether it's at school or wherever it is, when we're dealing with these young ones, we've got to look at them. Every child has to know they matter, and every child has to know success. So what do? We look at each one individually, and we find out what they're good at, because you will find something they are good at. It won't be too hard. You forget all the things they can't do, and you just work on enhancing what they can do. And show, try your best to show, to give them a skill in some way or other. And I think we could do that through turning the prison farms into vocational education centres. So taking them out of the prisons, put them in there, because they're going to need to be locked up. Otherwise, they'll steal a car or run up more offences until you've had a chance to work with them. And the community is the biggest part of the problem too. So bring the community and educate them. But their kids are growing up without them, and bring the families in. But you still have to keep them under lock and key. And I've been pushing that ever since Campbell Newman was Premier, but I haven't got anywhere. So from the cradle to the grave, we have to support every generation through the whole of the life course and the whole of community. School nurses, healthy pregnancies, community children's residences. I have this thing that, you know, in a country town, rather than taking children away, you keep them in the community. But now Cherbourg has a children's shelter, and I've been aware of it running for 25, 27 years, and it's always been run really well. I mean, it's always been a success. Other things will fall down, but the children's shelter's going. So why don't we expand on that idea? We have a children's hub. We've got residences for the kids. The specialists and all the people they need come there to see them. Grandma can come, she can read to the kids, help them with homework. She doesn't have to do the washing or cook food, etc. And if mum and dad are functioning okay too, and they're not using, they're welcome in. But don't take the kids away. Keep them so that the community can learn how to cocoon them. And you know, it'd save money doing it that way, because in 2015, I think it was, we spent $3.6 billion on children in out-of-home care. The same year we spent 10.5 million was allocated over 4 years for prevention of FASD. So it's pretty awful. So we have to act on the primary disabilities too, and prevent the secondary disabilities. So the earlier you get it, you recognise the alcohol exposure before birth, you can actually work with those children to prevent the secondary disabilities that put them into jail. And the juvenile justice initiatives and the life skills on the prison farms, but it's also unconditional support. You can't say, oh, you can't give up. You can never, ever, ever give up, because you will find if you change your pattern of caring for these children, things will happen. And, you know, the main thing is that you understand brain differences, and it's not that the children can't, but it's not that they won't, but they can't. They can't understand what you're looking for, and you modify the expectations and you manage the environment. Now, I set this group up in 2009 up at UQ Centre for Clinical Research. Professor Paul Colditz So those 4 babies on the bottom are seeing the writing on the wall. But what I want you to do, please, most of our work these days happens on Facebook, and I don't know how Queensland Health feels about Facebook, but we've got the Queensland FASD support group is down the Gold Coast. What happened when Dr. Doug Shelton set up his diagnostic clinic down there? The first one, first young child, boy child to be diagnosed, his mum, with very little education or anything, just set up this support group and said she got a group of other mums whose children were being diagnosed and saying, this is our problem, we've got to do something about it. And now this week their members have totaled over 600, because members from around the world, and this is where the gold evidence is. If you want to see the best practices with kids with fetal alcohol, you go down there at the Gold Coast and ask these mums to tell you what it is to raise a child with fetal alcohol and how they deal with the meltdowns, etc., etc. And they are the most brilliant group that you could possibly imagine. And then there's also the group that I'm president of, which is the Russell Family Fetal Alcohol Disorders Association, which is RFADA, RFFADA, and Niall is going to see that you get that too. And all the latest research, screening tools, etc., you'll find on that Facebook site or on their website. So there's some really good stuff out there. Okay. Well, that's me, Emtasol.
Thank you. Thank you for a very powerful and emotive presentation. Before you go, I'd like to see if there's any questions in the room. No, silence today. Interesting. We did have a couple online, but you may well have answered them just in your kind of summary at the end of where people can get some more information. But I'll ask them anyway. Have any FASD screens been developed for use with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island consumers in recent years?
Not specifically for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, but there are. If somebody wants to do that, there are screening tools that they can download, and also there are things such as no, I don't think they've got a screening tool. There's the ones with the Aboriginal Medical Services. 83 Aboriginal Medical Services developed a prevention program, and you get that out of the hub at Telethon Institute. But no, but if anybody is interested in downloading a screening tool and running it past people, I mean, it's pretty much transferable anyway, in my opinion. But if anybody has any questions too, on the first slide, my contact details are there. And as I say, I'm a free voice and I'll go anywhere around this area.
The only other question I've got online is that Goody tool.
The Goody tool.
How do you spell that so that somebody can look that up?
It's GUDDI.
Fabulous. Thank you for that, Dr. Janet Hammill. Thank you for your presentation today.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for listening.